Welcome to the Active Terror Cells Symposium. Today, we have gathered here to delve into the intricate world of terrorism and shed light on some of the most notorious and active terror cells across the globe. Now, our aim is to deepen our understanding of these organizations, their ideologies, and the threat they pose to global security. So I am your host, and I'll be guiding you through this engaging, insightful journey. So first up, we have Miss Angela presenting on Al-Shabaab. Angela, go ahead.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Angela Serrano, and I'm from Spain, and I will be presenting on Harakat al-Shabaab al-Mujahideen. And do I share now my screen?
Yes, I just allowed you to share your screen.
Yeah.
Change to speaker view. So you're the one.
Okay. So I will go through all these aspects in order to give you a thorough understanding about how this organization operates, how it's structured, and how its implication in the region affect everybody. But first of all, we need to, well, first, can you see the screen? Is everything okay?
Yes.
Okay. But first of all, we need to know that Harakat al-Shabaab al-Mujahideen, it's commonly known as Al-Shabaab and translated into English as the youth. It emerged as a Somali military wing of a political organization called Islamic Courts Union, with the goal of regaining control of Somalia from militant groups and warlord forces. It is basically an Islamic insurgent group based in Somalia that is in Central East Africa, as you can see in the slide. So now I will give you a timeline of the most important situations that happen in the country. And it's important to know that since 1991, Somalia has existed in chaos. Politicians, warlord forces have fought for control, and they have looted government agencies and foreign aid. In December 2006, Al-Shabaab split from the ICU, the union from now on, to become an independent organization with its own political objectives. They wanted to establish Islamic State with a Sharia law foundation in the government. And in fact, they gained control at the beginning in the southern part of Somalia, including the capital that it's called Mogadishu. Nevertheless, there was a military campaign led by the African Union, supported by the United States and Western partners, that provoked Ethiopian forces to push away the ICU from the power and replace it with a transitional federal government, or TFG. So these really fragmented the union. In the following year, 2007, the United Nations approved a peacekeeping force called AMISOM in order to support this federal government in its battle against Al-Shabaab. The following year, Al-Shabaab was already designated a terrorist organization by the United States government. And from here, the organization started to move in a two-phase strategy. At the beginning, they wanted to overthrow the government in Somalia backed by these Ethiopian forces, but they lack of the capability to complete the objective. So they adopted a guerrilla warfare strategy in order to at least match the military power that AMISOM had. Nevertheless, they were able to do that. So in 2011, AMISOM and the federal government forces pushed Al-Shabaab out of Mogadishu. And with the help of Kenya and Somali forces too, Kenya invades Somalia because there were kidnappings played by the militant group. And also they helped to cut off a major source of funding that this organization had at the moment. Unfortunately, the same year, Al-Shabaab started to formalize link with Al-Qaeda and also their affiliates. So they started to become and be supported by them. In 2013, in response to the presence of Kenya in Somalia, they carry out the deadliest attack in the capital. And following that, the U.S. carry out an airstrike in order to kill the current leader, well, the leader at the moment, called Ahmed Abdi Godani, that was finally killed. And talking about Ahmed Abdi Godani, that was a former leader killed in 2014. He started to work for the organization after the also killed by an airstrike of Adin Khashiairo in 2008. He was a former unionist, and currently we find Abu Ubadia as the leader, and two of the most important people that he has within the organization that are Mahad Karate and Fuad Mohammad Khalaf, an Amniyat commander and a financial facilitator. And if you wonder what's a Amniyat commander, it's the person that focuses on the intelligence within the organization. And when it comes to its structure, it's largely cohesive. They have an administration. They have a leader called the Emir that focuses on security, media, and high-level operation. And then it's divided in like three parts: a legislative council, executive council, and different departments called Maktab, focusing on military affairs, security, justice administration, and different recollection of taxes. Now, at the moment, the organization counts with, well, in between 7,000 and 12,000 of fighters, not only fighters, but also administrative workers and health workers. And this recruitment started in rural areas. And you may think also that they only focus in the areas in which they had control, but actually they also recruit from the capital, for example, in which they don't have the control. And they don't discriminate. It's either men, women, or children. In fact, in 2020, the 75% of the population that was recruited were children in between 12 and 24 years old. They build a strategy of recruitment based on clan conflicts, and they do that through coercion, indoctrination, and financial incentive. And moving on to the funding and resources that the organization receive, we find terrorist organizations such as Al-Qaeda, private individuals, investors, piracy, kidnapping, and extortion, and most important, charcoal and sugar production and exports. As you can see in the slide, altogether, the group generates around $100 million per year through this channel. And it's believed that 1/4 of this revenue is used to buy weapons and explosives. And now moving to the activities and current status of the organization, you can see that I mentioned the deadliest attacks in which more than 30 people were killed that happened in Somalia and Uganda and Kenya. And they were mainly bombing attacks, car explosions, shootings. They claimed the responsibility of high-profile bombings and shootings. And when it comes to nowadays, they recently have increased their presence in the southwest province in Somalia, in which you can find Mogadishu, the capital, and you can see that battles occurs, explosions, and remote violence, and the percentage of fatalities have increased, although the numbers of events have been reduced. But for example, in June 7th, and so you can see in the key developments, Al-Shabaab claimed the killing of more than 100 soldiers in a suicide attack. And as Kenya is also important, because I mentioned earlier that they have a presence in Somalia, they also conduct attacks there. But in this case, they focus on violence against civilians and more riots. We mentioned that they use car bombings and shootings. They use explosive device, kidnapping, rape, and vandalism. They want to control the information environment using social media, and they actually in 2010 shut down the transmission of the BBC, and they started a new channel called Al Katabib News Challenge that was recently removed too. When talking about affiliations, we mentioned that in 2011 they formalized links with Al Qaeda. That means that they were the ones that provided ideological and operational support. But that means also that the affiliation from the main brand were also supportive of this organization, such as Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, based in Yemen, in which they were the ones offering training and expertise, to the fighters. And also Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, Boko Haram in Nigeria. And they also exploited the clan dynamics, as they are using as I said before, they were using it to build a recruitment strategy with the clan conflicts. So they use these clan dynamics to get even more support from these affiliations. When it comes to counterterrorism efforts, the federal government of Somalia has focused on law enforcement. They have increased its capacity to investigate and prosecute the cases that Al-Shabaab are now currently doing. They have implemented a watch listing, assistance, and support program, and they are starting to recruit and train criminal investigators and improve Somalis' access to formal justice. In terms of countering the financing of terrorism, they became part of the Middle East and North African Financial Action Task Force to counter money laundering and the financing of terrorism. And to counter violent extremism, they have increased the strategic communications and the enrollment in defector rehabilitation centers and created a resurrected defector hotline. When we think about the impact and consequences, the main thing is that in 2007, the United Nations, as I said earlier, approved the African Union mission in Somalia, AMISOM, and now it has more than 20,000 troops from Uganda, Burundi, Djibouti, Kenya, and Ethiopian. And now it's recently been renamed to ADMIS, the African Union Transition Mission in Somalia. And they want to conclude this operation in 2024. And Al-Shabaab, to conclude this presentation, I would say that Al-Shabaab stays resilient because there are factors that contribute to this resilience. We are talking about the political violence, the social marginalization, and discrimination. So we need to counter this threat in a multifaceted response, because there are a lot of factors that altogether combine, potentiate, or exacerbates the global impact of this organization. Thank you so much for listening to me, and I will now present Sami with her presentation.
Hello everyone, my name is Javeria Sami. I'm from Pakistan, so I chose TTP, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, as my terrorist organization. I'll just share. Can everyone see my screen and hear me right?
Yes.
Okay. So TTP is the historic background for TTP is that it's an umbrella organization. So it's a conglomerate of around 40 Islamist militant organizations in Pakistan. So it consists of Punjabi Taliban, Afghani Taliban, Al-Qaeda elements, Haqqani network, other banned organizations such as Lashkar-e-Taiba, Lashkar-e-Jangi. So these all are radical Islamist organizations that have their leaders have come together to form this terrorist organization. It was formalized by Baitullah Masood in 2007, and it is primarily based in South Waziristan. Their aims were basically to counter the Western invasion in Afghanistan, and they were quite anti-US. But with time, their aims have differed and evolved into offensive jihad against the Pakistani forces. So that is security forces and military and intelligence operatives. So basically, for example, these are the factions, and these are the name of those leaders. So when I talk about recruitment and membership, for example, there's this famous leader Hafiz Gul Bahadur, who is in control of North Waziristan faction. So he will recruit the local Pashtun of those area, which is North Waziristan. And this is also what Concern Foundation also estimates, that the membership is mostly Pashtun. Pashtuns are the locals of Fata area in Pakistan where this organization is based. There is recorded to be around 2,500 to 6,000 members currently in this organization, and they use this umbrella structure to recruit further members into that organization. There are also indications that women play a kind of indirect role into the functioning of TTP because there's a lot of religious and cultural constraints there. So, but there is indication that they do play a major role as well. Um, so they, for their structure have also evolved with time. As I said, after the Afghan Taliban took over Afghanistan, their structure was first a loosely united groups or umbrella structure, but now it has become a centralized one. So before, the local commanders had greater power, greater decision on the number of attacks and types of attacks and the target type of those attacks, and it was very difficult to replace those tribal commanders. But now the center has a greater power, greater decision and veto powers. They have in 2023 also increased their ministry. So they have, for example, included an intelligence directorate, a brigade and training camp, or a housing department. But even before that, they had different ministries like ministries for political affairs or finance or even education, even welfare. And each ministry had a minister and a deputy. Also, throughout Pakistan, they work in the Delgai system. So Delgai in Pashto means group, but over here they mean the smallest military unit. So Delgai is there are around 400 Delgai throughout Pakistan, and their criteria is that there has to be like 5 members in urban areas and 25 members in tribal areas. For funding and resources, so there's various types of sources for this. First of all, there was this trade agreement called Afghanistan Transit Trade Agreement that actually caused a vacuum in the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. So that is where FATA area lied. That is where most of the terrorist organizations or smugglers or criminals or even Pashtun merchants, they commit kind of smuggling activities because those goods that are transported are tax free. So TTP levies security taxes on them, on those goods. For example, they can be like vehicles or vehicular parts or things like that. TTP also has its hand on opium trade, which is grown in Afghanistan area bordering Pakistan. So TTP levies like 15% tax on opium distributors, and it also levies 15% on the opium laboratories. Also, there's TTP also occasionally recruits security professionals in training and provides them with weapons and then deploys them into big cities of Pakistan, for example, Karachi, and then they commit bank heists over there. There was this criminal jihadist organization called Jundullah, and TTP's leader, Baitullah Masood, provided them with a hit list, with weapons, with trainings, and they once committed a bank heist worth of $73,500. So they commit like very massive bank heist. Also, these contributions or voluntary funding provided by the Pashtun merchants or very affluent or elite people who have been contacted by tribal leaders. And the tribal leaders use their influence to gather a very elite group, and they ask for funding and like kind of encourage sympathy among them. And CTC actually estimates that in one setting, those voluntary funders can donate as much as $100,000. So like these both are very major sources of funding for them. Also, the middle class or low class society of Pakistan also does provide funding to TTP in a very indirect or a very conning or deceiving manner, because there's this thing called zakat, which is a charity in Islam. So if they provide a zakat to a mosque which is controlled by TTP, or it comes under TTP leaders' domains, that is also indirectly that goes to TTP as well. For attacks and the number of casualties that they commit, I use Global Terrorism Database for that. Total from 2007 to 2020, they have committed around 1,550 incidents, and it kept on increasing from 2007 to 2014. The majority of the attacks were in 2014, and after that, they have declined from there. Their usual tactics was first bombing explosion, that it was followed by hijacking, and then it was armed assault. Can everyone see my graphs here?
Yeah.
We can, but can you go into present mode, please? Yeah, at the very bottom, you'll see the slide, go down on the right-hand side there. Go over a little more. The last one.
Okay, slide so.
Yeah,
Okay.
click there. There we go.
And for target type, their target types are mostly citizens, followed by military and police. And strangely, in 2010 and 11, transportation was also a part of that. And perhaps because mass public also uses that, so that is where the private citizens elements comes in. In terms of the impact that they have, relatively speaking, they don't have as much impact as other terrorist organizations. So their impact usually lies in casualties from 0 to 10 per attack. Their operational methods and tactics, as I said, have changed. From in 2020, they also changed their manifesto and claim that they are now moving from an international jihad to a local one. And so their tactics also evolved after that. First, they used to commit suicide bombings, as I showed on the graph, and they used to commit high profile attacks. But especially after, since the Pakistani military conducted operations against them and their change in manifesto, they started to conduct guerrilla warfare attacks more and targeted killings. Also in 2018, they claimed that they will no longer be committing indiscriminate attacks. So they will not be focusing on civilians or religious minorities, which they did before, but they will be focusing on high profile or targeted killings. So like Pakistani forces, intelligence operatives. Also, this is a big shift from what their initial goal was, because initially they had a lot of Al Qaeda elements inside their ranks in 2007. So they did try to commit international attacks as well. For example, they did try in 2010 to bomb New York City, but that was a failed attempt. But a year before that, they did lead, I think, a suicide attack. They on a coast in the Khost province of CIA's base in Afghanistan. So their manifesto completely changed, like after the Afghan Taliban took over, or even like 1-2 years before that. So the Pakistani government conducted around 5 military operations against terrorist organizations in general since 2001, but after 2007, the Operation Zalzala or Rust was committed, that also targeted TTP elements. However, Operation Zerbalism was very specific to TTP, because this is where the Prime Minister tried to negotiate with TTP in 2014, but it failed tremendously. After that, the TTP attacked the international airport in Karachi, and that is where this operation began. It costed billions of dollars actually, and millions of people were displaced after this operation. So this was a very major operation. After that, TTP increased its offensive, and they conducted a very infamous Peshawar attack on Army Public School, and they killed around 150 children over there. After that, the Pakistani political forces, they came together and they formed a National Action Plan in 2014. By 2016, the Pakistani army claimed that the FATA area is cleared of militants at the moment, and around 500 Pakistani soldiers had died because of that, and they had killed around 3,500 militants. In 2000 and I think in 2018, the leader of TTP, Mullah Fazlullah, I have his picture over here, the one on the right. He was killed in a drone attack in Afghanistan. And then the person on the left, Nur Wali Masood, he took over as a leader of TTP. And after that, their attacks have only increased with time. So in April 2022, they also began a spring offensive called Operation Al Badr. And that they are conducted an Operation Al Badr, and they carried out around 54 attacks in only 1 month. In average, so TTP is not only active right now, but it's expanding exponentially. So it can be seen from the fact that, like, in 2020, the average attacks were only 14.5, but then they increased to 45.8 in 2022. And not only that, they have increase their operational capacity because they have the greater land in Afghanistan to use for recruitment and mounting attacks, and they have greater access to weapons because of some of the weapons that have been left by NATO forces in Afghanistan, and they have even domestically increased their power and their strength in Balochistan, which is a province in Pakistan. So they have formed alliances with 2 Balochi militant groups over there as well, and they use those Balochi nationalist agendas for their own agendas. And in 2023, April, May, the Pakistani armies claimed a nationwide offensive against them. So this is like the biggest one that has been happened since 2014. So this is another counterterrorism operation that is occurring right now. For their de-radicalization efforts, there was basically 2 that was attempted to occur. First was FATA Youth Package in 2014 that actually claimed that they will kind of recruit 14,000 people from FATA into the army. They will provide around 1,500 children free education, and they will enroll them into army public schools, and training centers and cadet colleges were introduced, and like different names, for example, Balochistan Institute of Technical Education. The second attempt was FATA Sustainable Return and Rehabilitation Strategy. This was with collaboration with UNDP, but it had very broad agendas. It claimed that they will strengthen the economy and they will rehabilitate the infrastructure of the whole region, or that they will increase social cohesion, peace building. So it was not as effective as FATA Youth Package because there was a huge gap in the discourse of what the Pakistani government claimed and what the implementation was. So right now, to conclude, TTP is active and expanding, and since the Taliban have taken over Afghanistan, there have been various attempts of Afghan Taliban trying to mediate between TTP and Pakistani government, but almost most of them have failed in their efforts. And it has been shown by history that military operations are the most successful or effective ones at reducing their effectiveness. And now how do I okay. And now I will pass it on to the third person. Is it?
Yeah, that's me. Thank you very much, Sammy, for that presentation. Can you all see my screen okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you to the Global Counterterrorism Institute for giving me this opportunity.
Can
to
you
delve.
can you turn your screen on, Rafi?
Is my screen not on?
Your screen's on, but you're not on.
Oh,
Your
I
camera.
see. Sure. Sorry about this.
There you go.
Okay.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. So I've taken this opportunity to delve into the IRGC, which isn't exactly like the terrorist organizations which are sort of presented today, because it is so far reaching. And in fact, it is one of the most powerful paramilitary organizations, in my assessment, in the Middle East. So in this presentation, I would like to explore the objectives, the aims, and the mechanisms of the IRGC, and to also elaborate on the counter-terrorism measures associated with the organization. So this group, this militant organization, is officially known as the Army of Guardians of the Revolution, in Farsi, in Iranian, but is known in the English-speaking world as the IRGC. So as I mentioned, this organization is one of the most powerful paramilitary organizations in the Middle East. And it originated with the Iranian Revolution. So the Iranian Revolution in 1978 to 79 resulted in the toppling of the authoritarian government in Iran led by the Shah, which itself took power after an uprising in 1951 to 1953, which toppled Mohammad Mossadegh, who was the democratically elected leader at that time, who sought to nationalize the oil industry in Iran. So really, this organization was designed to safeguard the Islamic ideals of that revolution and of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And whereas the Iranian army protects the country's sovereignty in a traditional capacity, the IRGC's constitutional mandate is to ensure the integrity of the ideology that controls the country. And its objectives include, as you can see on screen, preventing foreign interference, thwarting traditional military coups, crushing dissent in the country, and spreading Iranian influence throughout the region. So, structure. How does the IRGC actually work? Well, what makes the IRGC so formidable is the fact that it is backed by an entire state, and really it works more like a traditional military. So you can see on screen that the command structure of Iran is divided into three main branches when we're talking about the army. And the IRGC really runs parallel to the Artesh, the conventional military. And we'll see in a moment the different branches of the IRGC and how they work. But really, what I want to get at for this particular screen in this slide is that the IRGC did come into fruition with the Iranian Revolution, but it wasn't until the Iran-Iraq War, when Saddam Hussein was to launch a war against Iran, did the IRGC really find capacity as an extraterritorial unit. Because really it was then when the Al-Quds force, Quds meaning Jerusalem, came to be and would start its sort of operations across Iran's borders. So Iran has approximately 1.5 million active reserve military personnel, with the potential to up to 1 million more personnel in active reserve. And leading this whole organization, this whole web, is the supreme leader himself, the head of state of Iran at the moment, Khomeini. And here are the main branches of the IRGC. And if you do have any questions throughout this presentation, please do just shout, just interrupt me, and I'll do my best to answer them according to my research. So the IRGC is a massive organization, as I've said, and it's made of upward of 190,000 troops, according to the International Institute for Strategic Studies. So each branch in the IRGC has a very specific role. The ground forces, which you can see on the left, is made up of roughly 150,000 personnel, and it is based across Iran's 31 provinces, numbering as you can see, very significantly. And they often fare far better than Iran's traditional military forces, as in the Iran-Iraq war and the growth of ISIS, which we'll see in a moment. The Navy, again, a massive force, really, separate from the naval branch of Iran's regular military. And they patrol Iran's maritime borders, including the Straits of Hormuz, through which some 1/3 of the world's seaborne crude oil passes each year. So massive, massive power in that Navy. The Navy has 20,000, as you can see, plus potentially troops, whereas the conventional army in Iran only has roughly 18,000. So actually, it is even much stronger than their standing army. And the aerospace force too, with some 15,000 troops, doesn't fare quite as well as the Air Force in Iran, which has 37,000 personnel. But what it is in charge of is the missile projects, which is a significant threat for the region, especially with the proximity of major non-NATO allies such as Israel and NATO members such as Turkey. The Pasij military, which you can see on the second last block here, is also a very interesting force because it claims to mobilize some 600,000 volunteers. The key word being there, volunteers. So these are sort of citizens of Iran raised from the population, which can then come to the aid of the IRGC. And finally, the Quds Force, that operative extraterritorial branch of the IRGC, which is responsible for shoring up support in proxies across the Middle East and wider region, including in Asia and in Africa. The IRGC though, isn't just a militia, it's not just a militant organization, it is also a huge conglomerate of private corporations and private companies. And this is how the IRGC raises its funds. A 2020 report from the Centre for Strategic and International Studies said that the IRGC has become the most powerful controller of all important economic sectors across Iran. And just on the screen, I've laid out a few examples in energy, construction and engineering, transportation, financial services, and telecommunications. The 14 groups on the left of the screen are thought to be the most prominent of these private companies linked to the IRGC. But essentially, what this means is that affiliated businesses can have no bid contracts from the state to service the oil sector and develop infrastructure. And these funds can be used for weapons acquisition, for covert operations abroad, and Iran's nuclear program, which is burgeoning, as we know from recent developments. It is also used to support veterans and the families of IRGC members who have been killed in combat, and to support public works projects in developing Iran's rural regions, which essentially builds goodwill with regards to the IRGC and the population in urban areas, and provide work for those Basij volunteers who we discussed previously. So I'd just like to move on now. And I mentioned before that the IRGC comes into play with regards to the other terrorist organizations which we mentioned during the session. And that's because it really does train, fund, and organize many of those terrorist organizations. And just on screen here, we have some of them. This isn't a complete list, but this is sort of these are the main groups from my research that I found operating in each of the regions. So we have Ansar Allah, i.e. the Houthi movement in Yemen, which exhorts a Zaidi Shia ideology and was established in 1994. And that is causing immense devastation in Yemen due to the proxy conflict that has emerged with Saudi Arabia. And that war has claimed the most civilian casualties of any modern conflict in the past decade. So really terrible conflict going on there, propped up by Iran's IRGC, which again trains, facilitate logistics, and organizes Ansar Allah, the Houthi movement. We have the Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq, which was really a stronghold against ISIS. And in fact, interesting caveats that I found during my research was that at one point in time, the United States military actually provided the air cover for the PMF to conduct these operations against ISIS, which helped in the destruction of the Islamic State. But nevertheless, now what we're finding is a real Iranian stronghold in Iraq. They provide most of the oil in Iraq, and they have thoroughly embedded into the Iraqi political situation there. They're represented in their parliament, which we will come to later on. So really, the Quds Force presence is felt right across the Middle East. If we look at Hezbollah in Lebanon, that is conducting an ongoing offensive against Israel with the purpose to essentially wipe it off the map. And it's also causing internal friction with the Lebanese government at this time. Sources say that it has around 35,000 combatants, and it was established in 1984 following war with Israel, Lebanon's war with Israel, which saw the PLO driven out of the territory. So we have Hezbollah there. And what you can see across all these organizations is similar branding, similar theme, and that is really symbolic of Iranian influence with regards to these organizations. We can see, excuse my mispronunciation, but Liwa Zainabiyun, so Hezbollah Pakistan essentially, which exhorts a sort of Shia Islamism, again established in 2014 and has caused serious problems for the government there. We have the Al-Ashtar Brigades in Bahrain, which has conducted a series of operations mostly against military infrastructure in Bahrain, and it is now proscribed in its entirety. It is made up of roughly 200,000 personnel and was formed in 2014. So all of these organizations were really created towards sort of the late 80s or the 80s, 90s, and more recently. So this is a new phenomenon that we're seeing with the growth of these vacuums in the Middle East. So the vacuum formed by the fall of Saddam Hussein, later filled by ISIS, allowed Iran to sort of penetrate Iraq through the Quds Force and prop up these terrorist organizations. We have Quwat al-Rida in Syria, which is a small branch with 20,000 personnel, but actually it is quite supportive of the Assad government there, and Assad and Khomeini and the Iranian government have been in coordination to try and suppress the Kurdish independence movement there, and have committed some terrible human rights abuses, including, well, some absolutely horrific human rights abuses, which if I had more time, I would go into now. We also have Hamas. Now, Hamas is an interesting figure in this story because Hamas is a Sunni organization. So it is divergent in that it follows an alternative branch of Islam. And it's made up of around 25,000 personnel. So as we can see here, although most of the organizations do espouse a sort of Shia Islamist ideology, you know, that's not always the case. And there are other terrorist organizations in the Palestinian territories which are supported by Iran, which are not Shia, such as Palestinian Islamic Jihad and others. So a really interesting sort of side note there. Now, during the penetration or the support of Iraqi militia, actually, those organizations began targeting US forces too in Iraq and Syria, with one rocket attack, in fact, wounding dozens of personnel in 2021. So that collaboration that we saw a bit earlier really has sort of fizzled out by 2020. Now, the last sort of organization that I would like to touch on here is Liwa Fatawiyun, which is Hezbollah Afghanistan, which actually doesn't have that bad a relationship with the Taliban there, and have collaborated somewhat closely as they've taken hold of the country. So what does this mean for the region? I'd like to zoom out now and just really take a look at sort of the macro level arena. And what we can see here is that in the 43 years that the IRGC has been around, it's been responsible for plotting global terrorist attacks, hostage taking and other offences on foreign soil, including in Europe and the UK, as well as human rights violations in Iran. And we can see that on the bottom right map, which was taken from the Tony Blair Institute, which has gathered all of the terrorist incidents that have been attributed to the IRGC by the respective governments. Since 2015, there has been a surge in IRGC activity in Europe, in the UK and the United States, and most recently, MI5 acknowledged that the real threat from Iran's aggressive intelligence services included the kidnapping or attempted murder, killing of UK-based people in 2022, and they include Iranian dissidents and journalists. The discovery of an Iranian-linked bomb factory in London in 2015 was particularly concerning, as well as a successive chain of terror plots across Europe from 2017 to 2018, which suggests the interest of the Guards goes beyond the Middle East, whilst underscoring the urgency in these counter-terrorism processes, which need to be established sooner rather than later. And there is concern in the West that prescribing this organisation in its entirety would damage relations further with Iran, would entrench the Iranian position in its anti-Western agenda. And that is something that we don't see with other terrorist groups, with Hezbollah and some others. They have been prescribed by many Western governments because they are not that closely associated with any particular government. Sure, they're represented in parliament, but they're not that intrinsic to the states, whereas the IRGC represents almost another arm, another branch of the Iranian government itself. And that has caused some debate in Western societies over recent years. Javad Karimi Ghodoosi, a member of the Iranian parliament and a member of the National Security and Foreign Policy Committee in Iran, declared in 2022 that the Islamic Republic does not need to send IRGC members to terrorize Pompeo, basically, during the time, as there are zealous individuals in America who are aware of our positions and have fire at their disposal. They will take revenge, the likes of Trump and Pompeo. So that was actually said by a minister in Iran. And that really highlights the urgency that I believe counterterrorism branches across the world needs to take when it comes to the IRGC. There are also cultural centres which have been established across the world, really, which aim to enhance the links between the Iranian diaspora and other community groups with the Iranian government, and as an extension of that, with their policies, i.e. towards the IRGC. An example of this can be seen in London when a vigil was held for Soleimani after his execution, who was the general of the Quds Force, which the Trump regime took out promptly. Here, each block represents an active terrorist group. So previously, if we go to the prior slide, I mentioned a few, but they aren't the only organizations that are around. And in fact, in Iraq, there are many, many organizations. In fact, I think it was 67, which are included under the umbrella of the PMF, which have close officious links with the Iranian government. And that, of course, is very worrying indeed. The IRGC has prepared an estimated 200,000 fighters from Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. And what we see is cross-pollination when it comes to those groups. So organizations trained, prepared in Afghanistan or Pakistan may not stay there. They may be moved to other areas where they're more greatly needed, as in Syria and Iraq, as we have seen in recent years. So that is also a significant threat. And what we can see as these organizations have really proliferated, the societies in which they operate in or among, is we see successive steps. So we see destabilization mainly. We see a digging in or an entrenchment of those groups, and then significant influence in the politics of those countries. And just as a case study here, we've taken the Lebanon election results of 2022, and we can see Hezbollah and its allies have formed a bloc of 58 in 128 seats. So a significant bloc in Lebanon, which influences the politics, the society, and the economy of that country. And this is really concerning. And this is leading, as you can see here, to sort of a crescent of influence, sort of stretching right across from Pakistan into the Mediterranean, into the West Bank, and also down around Yemen. Now, we can take another case study. We can take Iraq, for example, which in recent years took part in an election within which the Coordination Framework Bloc, which was an alliance of Iran-backed parties, grew to 130 seats out of 329. So this isn't just isolated to the case of Lebanon. This is something that we're seeing sort of across the regions that are affected by the IRGC. Now, counterterrorism operations. How is this being combated? Well, firstly, which I haven't touched on in writing here on the screen, but what I want to talk about is the institutional frameworks which are attempting to counter the IRGC. So Saudi Arabia, leading the charge in many ways, has looked to combat Iranian influence by strengthening cooperation among the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, including Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, of course, and the UAE. And this bloc is a regional intergovernmental organization which seeks close economic union and political, we could say, coalition forming between the countries involved. And this is really to push back against the financial incursions which we're seeing in the region. Other organizations, other institutions include the International Maritime Security Construct, the IMSC, which is a consortium of countries whose official stated aim is the maintenance of order and security in the Persian Gulf. So as we saw the IRGC's Navy was active in the Persian Gulf, and this is made to sort of combat those influences. And those operations stretch right across from the Gulf of Oman, the Gulf of Aden, the Southern Red Sea, and countries involved include the UK, the US, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, and many others, including some European countries too, like Latvia and others. We also see the Arab League corresponding on this issue, working to counter the IRGC. And we can see that in sort of various policies that they've put forward. And the Arab League was formed in Cairo in 1945 and has a long-standing cooperative element, which is used by these countries concerned about Iranian influence to try and combat the likes of the IRGC. Another interesting development in the Middle East are the Abraham Accords, which were peace agreements struck between Israel and the UAE and Bahrain and others, including Morocco later on, and Sudan, although the Sudan deal is still somewhat in question. But regardless of this, we're seeing information sharing, we're seeing security coordination, and we're seeing sort of other regulations at place which formulate a cohesive policy across Israel and these new Arab partners. We can look at CENTCOM, which is a US military coordination umbrella, which Israel has recently joined, and that is located in Bahrain. And we can look at sort of other organizations, other intelligence sharing, which goes on too. So with that being said, I would like to sort of give the floor to you guys if you have any questions. And if not, then thank you very much for the time. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Thank you.
All right. So today I'm going to present the Hezbollah terrorist organization. And we will start by an inquiry that I would like you to have during the presentation, which is quite debatable. And that is if Hezbollah is a terrorist organization until today.
Can you go
But
into present mode, please?
Sorry?
Can you go into present mode, please?
I have it, haven't I?
No. Does your intern team want to help you out to go into present mode? See where it says 73% at the bottom?
Yes.
Click the little symbol to the left of the 73%.
Now?
Click it again. That one, yes.
All right.
It's not working?
For me, it's working. Is it working for you as well?
No. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Is everybody else seeing her screen in present mode?
Not me.
Yeah, I'm not either. I think one of the symbols up top, your computer's in Greek, so I cannot see. You need to go to present mode.
Yeah, the thing is that now I don't have it, but for example, now I have it and I have put the present mode. So I don't know why you cannot.
Yeah, I don't see it either.
Maybe if you press F5 in your computer, like in the keyboard.
No.
Interesting. That's okay. Go ahead and proceed.
Without the presentation?
No, go ahead. We can see the slide. We can see the screen. It's just not in present mode. So we see your slides, all of your slides on the left-hand side. So it's just the view settings that's not working correctly. That's okay. That's why we do rehearsals.
All right, 1 minute. I'm gonna try it one more time. Okay, if it's not working, I'm gonna do it like this.
Yeah, go ahead. That's fine.
So about the background and historical context, early in the 1980s, Hezbollah, a militant and political group in Lebanon, was established in opposition to Israel's occupation of southern Lebanon during the Lebanese Civil War. Now, Hezbollah is founded on a specific ideology, and that is that Israel is the little Satan. So that means that it has no right to exist, and efforts must be made to physically wipe it out. This ideology has been stated again and again over the years, but it has also been stated very recently in 2020 by the former Iranian president and Iran's supreme leader. Now, Hezbollah became a potent organization engaging in various activities, including, first of all, military operations, then social initiatives, and then political participation. This is also the three wings of the structure of Hezbollah. So we have the political wing, we have the social welfare wing, and we have the military terrorist or else jihadist wing. Hezbollah's three wings work in a synergy. They are run directly by Hezbollah's leader, whose name is Hassan Nasrallah, and by Hezbollah's Shura Council, which is also, this is an advisory council. It's also known as the board of directors, and is comprising the heads of the executive, the heads of the political and judiciary council, as well as 2 permanent Iranian representatives. Then we have below the Secretary General, which is in charge of the strategic decisions, and we can say that it's the public face of the terrorist organization. I would like now to highlight the methods of recruiting members. This is targeting the local population and mostly the younger people in areas where Hezbollah has networks on the ground. So, for example, in Russia, Hezbollah recruits Sunni Palestinian students studying at Russian universities, while in Uganda, they recruited Ugandan Shia students and sent them, so they took them away from Uganda and they sent them to study abroad at an Iranian university where they also received military training and they were educated, if we can put it that way, in how they use small arms, making explosives, counter interrogation techniques, and escape planning. Also before returning home, those Ugandan students were instructed on how to establish an operational network in Uganda. About the funding and resources, on a financial level, Hezbollah uses its own social and political institutions in Lebanon. Also, they use the Lebanese diaspora to funnel money and fund the organization's military activities. And apart from its own institutions, it has its own businessmen. So, for example, in December 2019, the US Department of Treasury designated Lebanese businessmen for years of illegitimate business activity in order to gather and then funnel illicit proceeds to Hezbollah. At this point that we are talking about Lebanon, one question arises, and it's quite debatable. So, can we hold Lebanon as responsible as a state actor for Hezbollah's implications and Hezbollah's terrorist activities? The answer to that question has many implications for humanitarian law and conflicts with Israel. So, on the one hand, if Hezbollah is considered a state actor, the conflict becomes international. So, the conflict is subject to the Geneva Convention and additional protocols, and that means that both Israel and Lebanon would be required to grant the prisoner of war status to combatants. However, on the other hand, if Hezbollah is not attributed to a specific state, that would mean that the conflict is non-international. It's governed by the Common Article 3, which sets out only the basic protection for individuals, and it will also be sourced by the customary law. Now, determining the attribution to Lebanon depends on whether Lebanon had the overall control. According to TADIC decision of IC2Y, the Lebanon needs to have the overall control over Hezbollah's military operation, and if Hezbollah acted as an authority which was empowered by the Lebanese government. To that questions, there is a conflict also in academia. So some argue that Hezbollah's strong presence in Lebanese politics and in also Lebanese culture, along with Iran and along with Lebanon's implicit support, that means that it acts on behalf of the country. On the other hand, argue that it's not a state-sponsored actor, and while Iran provides military support to Hezbollah, it does not directly control the group's behavior. Hezbollah adheres to Iran's ideology but maintains its independence. Other argues that Lebanon's allowance of weapons and responsibility to prevent attacks falling on Lebanon as a state, as a sovereign state. So this is very debatable, and there is no specific answer in practice or in academia. Now, apart from Lebanon, of course, we have the other main backers. So, for example, philanthropic contributions, its allies and backers, the affiliation and networks that they are going to be further analyzed in the next slides. And of course, illegal activities that bring in substantial sums of money, so drug trafficking, money laundering, and of course smuggling. Now, talking about activities, Hezbollah is involved in various endeavors, including armed resistance, military operation, regional involvement, and social and political efforts. In 1980s, the main focus was extreme violence against civilians. So Hezbollah carried out series of brutal acts such as kidnapping of foreign citizens, hijacking of planes, suicide bombings targeting the US Embassy. Then moving to 1990s, the focus moved to how to conceal the terrorist nature of the actions of Hezbollah. They tried to do this by becoming a political group, which happened in 1992. But even within Lebanese politics, Hezbollah had adopted a strategy of using violence to achieve its political objectives. So despite participating in elections, despite being part of the government and also a part of the parliament, it has resorted again to threats, assassination, street classes, and the seizure of strategic areas to consolidate power. Since the 2000s, Hezbollah has persisted in maintaining a military capability even after Israel withdrew from the international borders. Let's highlight here the Second Lebanon War in 2006, which witnessed the firing of approximately 4,000 missiles at Israeli civilian population. Now, apart from Lebanon, although of course Lebanon is based there, Hezbollah is based there, its manifesto clarifies that its operations, especially those targeting the US, are not confined by domestic borders. So actually they have said that the American threat is not local or restricted to a particular region, and as such, confrontation of such threat must be international as well. So there is also evidence of Hezbollah operations in Africa, Asia, Bulgaria, Cyprus, Nigeria, and all those attacks serves as clear evidence of its terrorist nature. However, despite of all those compelling evidence, there are some reasons behind which Hezbollah is not designated as a terrorist organization in the United Nations and also in the most nations in the world. So this ranges from a lack of international consensus on terrorist definition, the influence of political interests of individual states, limited knowledge about Hezbollah's true nature, and of course, the desire to avoid involvement. Furthermore, some countries have even accepted Hezbollah as a legitimate Lebanese political party defending legitimately Lebanon against Israeli aggression. Now, as already mentioned, the operational methods and tactics was mostly in 1980s pure violence. So human wave attacks, suicide bombings, Katyusha rockets, which initially launched in response to the assassination of Hezbollah's leader and then became a strategic weapon. But then they kind of swifted to other tactics as well. For example, propaganda efforts, particularly through their TV station, which was called Al-Manar. And also in the late 1980s, Hezbollah had conflicts with another organization, a rival Shiite organization, which was called Amal. And also it had faced clashes with the Syrian army. In order to manage to overcome those challenges and regain support, they adopted a different pragmatic approach. So Hezbollah offered the Lebanese people a deal to support the resistance against Israel, and then they would refrain from imposing an Islamic republic and dictating how people should live their lives. They also focused on providing special social services, and that's why they even built a whole social welfare structure financed largely by Iran in order to address the critical needs such as healthcare. And they also adopted a plan to reconstruct the homes of damaged people by Israeli attacks. Affiliation and networks. So Hezbollah maintains relationship and affiliations with numerous organizations, including terrorist organizations, criminal gangs, or even governments. Of course, it has long relationship with Iran, which is the main state sponsor, but also other militant organizations, including Hamas, which is going to be presented by Ludovica after me, and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. With those terrorist organizations, they exchange materials, operational know-how, and also training. Now, I would like to mention a very, very recent official report from June 2022, which aimed to provide an examination of Hezbollah-affiliated activity in the US by examining all publicly known federal criminal cases starting from 1997 to 2020 with a concrete link to Hezbollah. The authors found evidence of 128 individuals that meet these criteria. The majority of cases involve small, centralized hubs of Hezbollah who engage in illegal activities in conjunction with wider criminal enterprises to create an array of networks across the US. These arrangements have allowed Hezbollah to profit financially and deepen its influence in the US, even though that many of the cases display a minimal direct connective links to the terrorist organization itself. So based on the analysis of the cases, the authors identified two distinctive categories of participations in Hezbollah activities in the US. First of all, individuals who provided financial support to Hezbollah, and those were most of them, the majority of them, amounting to 109 individuals, and then those who provided operational support, which was only 19 individuals. Now, about the counterterrorism efforts, various governments and international organizations are focusing their anti-terrorism efforts on Hezbollah. These initiatives mostly focus on impeding the organization's operations, cutting off the funding, and dealing with the impacts and consequences. Most of them, the most centralized of those efforts, are based in the US. So US policymakers see Hezbollah as a global terrorist threat. The United States designated Hezbollah a foreign terrorist organization in 1997, and several individuals, Hezbollah members, are considered global terrorists, which subjects them to the US sanctions. Barack Obama provided aid to Lebanon's military with the hope of diminishing Hezbollah credibility as the country's most capable military force. Then Donald Trump administration has sanctioned some of Hezbollah's members I'm sorry, as part of its maximum pressure campaign against Israel. Joe Biden has continued sanctioning individuals connected to Hezbollah financing network, but then the European Union has taken a less aggressive approach to Hezbollah. The bloc designated its military arm a terrorist group only in 2018 over its involvement in the bombing in Bulgaria and its backing of the Assad regime. So in 2014, Europol and the United States created a joint group to counter Hezbollah's terrorist activities in Europe. And in July, the International Criminal Court, ICC, established a special tribunal to investigate the assassination of Rafik Hariri, the former Lebanese prime minister. The consequences and the current status of the organization. Now, Hezbollah had significant impacts and consequences at various levels. On a regional scale, Hezbollah's actions have posed direct challenge to Israel's security and may even have the potential to escalate to a full-scale conflict. Additionally, the group's support for militant groups and proxy forces in different countries has fueled instability and violence in the region. The same goes to the national level. While it has provided social services, and because of that, it has gained great support from specific parts of the population, but its significant political and military power has created divisions and hindered the country's political stability. Internationally, Hezbollah designation as a terrorist organization by many countries has resulted in diplomatic and also economic consequences. It has faced sanctions and restrictions on its financial networks, limiting its ability to operate and access global financial systems. The group's connection with Iran has also strained relationship with countries in the region and beyond, which has caused geopolitical tensions. Now, the current status of Hezbollah is an expanding international network, which is way more cautious than it used to be about the direct conflicts with the US and Israel. Instead, they rely on covert operations and terrorism. For example, despite threats of retaliation for the killing of a very important person of Hezbollah, which was called Soleimani, they have not carried out significant reprisals. Within Lebanon, Hezbollah has taken advantage of the country's crisis to strengthen even further their position and violating US sanctions by importing fuel from Iran. However, their credibility is questioned due to the alleged involvement of Hezbollah in the Beirut port explosions, leading to tensions and violence. Some experts even say that they believe that Hezbollah's influence is decreasing extremely with the passage of time, as seen by growing dissatisfaction and support for opposition forces, as was mentioned by in the previous presentation. Now, the last slide is about the prevention and the radicalization efforts. So according to the US government policy, in order to address the threat posed by Hezbollah and its criminal activities, several measures are proposed. So first of all, to designate additional Hezbollah entities involved in criminal activities and target their criminal support networks worldwide. This entails applying secondary sanction to financial institutions that still provide banking services to Hezbollah outside the Middle East, and considering the designation of Hezbollah as transnational criminal organization. Furthermore, utilizing international forums, NGOs, initiatives in order to raise awareness and build capacity in countering Hezbollah activities. What needs to be done is a unified strategy across multiple agencies. For example, Europol, Interpol, European Public Prosecution Office, even the ICC, in order to target Hezbollah's involvement in drug trafficking, money laundering, and other criminal enterprises, and a focus in the funding of the organization, which is the root of Hezbollah's activities. In conclusion, a suggestion which always is very important is education and social initiatives. So implementing social programs and educational initiatives is crucial to promote long-term stability. So we can address the root causes of radicalization and extremism and providing at-risk individuals with alternative pathways. Additionally, educational initiatives that promote critical thinking, media literacy, and tolerance can empower individuals to challenge extremism and foster a more inclusive society. These measures, while not eliminating Hezbollah influence entirely, can help mitigate the risk of indirectly aiding Hezbollah while supporting Lebanon's security and stability. And of course, we should not forget the intricate that Hezbollah has shown us, the intricate between politics, ideology, and social welfare. So thank you for your attention.
is Ludovica.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can't see you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. And then we want to make sure that you're able to,
Okay.
we want to make sure that you're on present mode also. Let me
Yeah,
stop.
I asked Angela to share the screen for me because my laptop is not working when it comes to sharing the screen. I don't know why. So you should see it now.
I do.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Ludovica, and today I'll be presenting on Hamas. So I'll start with a brief introduction about Hamas. Hamas is a militant movement and one of the Palestinian territory's two major political parties, and it governs more than 2 million Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, but the group is best known for its armed resistance to Israel. And dozens of countries have designated Hamas as a terrorist organization, though some apply this label only to the military wing. So moving on to the next slide, we will analyze what are the group's origins. So Hamas is an acronym for Harakat al-Muqawama al-Islamiyya, that it's the Islamic resistance movement that was founded by Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, a Palestinian cleric who became an activist in local branches of the Muslim Brotherhood after dedicating good part of his early life to the Islamic scholarship in Cairo. Yassin has established the Hamas as the Brotherhood political arm in Gaza in December 1987, following the outbreak of the First Intifada, which was the Palestinian uprising against the Israeli occupation of the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. And at that time, Hamas' purpose was to counter the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. That was another organization whose commitment was to violently resisting Israel, threatened to draw Palestinian support away from the Brotherhood. Later on in 1988, Hamas published its charter calling for the destruction of Israel and for the establishment of an Islamic society in the historic Palestine. So later on in 2017, Hamas presented a new document that accepted an interim Palestinian state along the Green Line border established before the Six-Day War, but still refused to recognize Israel. Hamas first employed the suicide bombing in April 1993, 5 months before the PLO leader Yasser Arafat and Israeli Prime Minister Rabin signed the Oslo Accords. And this historic pact has established limited self-government for parts of the West Bank and Gaza under a newly created entity that was the Palestinian Authority. So now we will look at the leaders and the structure. So Hamas has a host of leadership bodies that perform different functions, so the political, the military, and the social functions. So the general policy is set by an overarching consultative body, which is called Politburo, which operates in exile. And there are also local committees that manage grassroots issues in Gaza and the West Bank. Then Ismail Haniyeh serves nowadays as the political chief, having replaced the longtime leader Khaled Meshal in 2017. And the political chief, Haniyeh, has operated from Doha in Qatar since 2020 because Egypt restricts its movement into and out of Gaza. So Hamas leaders established a presence in Qatar after falling out with their previous host, that was Syria. Then day-to-day affairs in Gaza are overseen by Yahya Sinwar, who previously headed the Hamas military wing and served for 22 years in an Israeli prison for masterminding the abduction and killing of Israeli soldiers. Then moving forward, we have Marwan Issa and Mohammed Deif, which command the Hamas military wing that is called the Izan Adin al-Qassam Brigades. And lastly, we have Sahel al-Aruri, which became the head of Hamas West Bank leadership following the internal election that were concluded in 2021. So now we will look at how Hamas is funded in the next slide. And as a designated terrorist entity, Hamas is cut off from official assistance that the United States and the European Union provide to the PLO in the West Bank. But historically, Palestinian expatriates and private donors in the Gulf provided much of the movement's funding. In addition, there were also some Islamic charities in the West that have channeled money to back social service groups. Gaza's economic situation is dire, and Egypt and Israel closed their borders with it in 2006, 2007, restricting the movement of both goods and people into and out of the territory. So the two countries maintain a blockade, cutting off the territory from most of the world and forcing over 1 million Gazan Palestinians to rely on international aid. And Israel allows Qatar to provide hundreds of millions of dollars in assistance to Hamas. 4 years after the blockade began, Hamas has collected revenue by taxing goods moving through a network of tunnels that circumvented the Egyptian crossing into Gaza. And these brought staples such as food, medicine, and cheap gas for electricity production into the territory, as well as like construction materials and arms. After the Egyptian president Fattah al-Sisi took power in 2013, Cairo became hostile toward Hamas, which it saw as an extension of its chief domestic rival, like the Muslim Brotherhood. The Egyptian army shut down most of the tunnels, breaching its territory, while it waged a counter-terrorist campaign against a branch of the self-proclaimed Islamic State on its side of the border. And following that, Egypt began to allow some commercial goods to enter Gaza through its Salah al-Din border crossing in 2018. Today, Iran is one of Hamas' biggest benefactors, which contributes to funds, weapons, and also training. And Iran has been providing around $100 million annually to Hamas, to the PIJ, and to the other Palestinian groups. And however, the United States have imposed sanctions after Washington 2018 withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal that have constrained Tehran's ability to fund its foreign partners. Moving on to the next slide, we will look at how Hamas governs Gaza. So Hamas has been the de facto authority in Gaza since shortly after Israel withdrew from the territory in 2005. The following year, Hamas has won the majority of seats in the PA's legislature and formed the government. In Gaza, Hamas routed Fatah's militias in a week of fighting, resulting in political schism between the two Palestinian territories. And since that, Palestinians have not voted for a legislature since 2006, nor for a president since 2008. As Hamas took over the remnants of the PA institutions in the Gaza Strip, it established a judiciary and put in place some authoritarian institutions. And even if in theory Hamas governs in accordance with the Sharia-based Palestinian law, as does the PIA, it's more restrictive than the law requires and includes controlling how women dress and enforces gender segregation in public. And moreover, Hamas also represses the Gazan media, the civilian activism on the social medias, the political opposition, and also NGOs, living without mechanisms for accountability. But now we will look at how the Palestinians view Hamas. So Hamas popularity in the next slide. Thank you, Angela. Hamas popularity surged following its conflict with Israel in May 2021. And this is a trend that has regularly been seen after bouts of violence with the country. From a poll, the from a poll, it emerged that the 53% of Palestinians surveyed in Gaza and the West Bank believe that Hamas is most deserving of representing and leading the Palestinian people, compared with a smaller percentage of 14, which prefer Fatah. And we have seen that this pollster anticipate that the support for Hamas could decrease in the next year, as it has happened in after previous conflicts. So now I wanted to focus this part of the presentation on how those Hamas challenge Israel. So Hamas began firing rockets and mortars into Israel after the group took over Gaza, and the Iranian security officials have said that Iran provided some of these weapons, but that Hamas gained the ability to build its own missiles after training with Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and proxies. Additionally, Hamas militants frequently fly balloons carrying incendiary devices toward Israel, and this sometimes causes fires. So the group has also carried out incursions into the Israeli territory, and most of these incursions included like kidnapping the Israeli soldiers. It has happened that Israel released more than 1,000 Palestinian prisoners, and in 2014, the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu accused the movement of kidnapping and murdering 3 Israeli teens in the West Bank. Lastly, in the last part of this presentation, I would like to focus on what happened during the 2021 Hamas-Israel conflict. So Hamas and Israel entered their deadliest conflict in 6 years in May 2021, when Hamas fired rockets into Israel, following weeks of tensions between the Palestinians and Israelis in Jerusalem. Some analysts have said that Hamas wanted to bolster its reputation as the defender of the Palestinian cause after DPA postponed the 2021 elections. And during this 11-day conflict, Hamas and the PIJ fired more than 4,000 rockets from Gaza, killing dozens of Israeli civilians and injuring more than 300 others. So Hamas reportedly coordinated with the IRGC and the Lebanon's Hezbollah during the fighting, and also used the suicide drones along with the arsenal of missiles. So now I would like to make a general reflection on the status of Hamas and how analysts have predicted that will evolve. So observers have said that Hamas' latest conflict with Israel increased the group's political clout, and that Hamas has won the support as the champion of the Palestinian national movement for the first time in years by attacking Israel in response to the tensions in Jerusalem, rather than confining itself to the issues in Gaza. And the May 21 ceasefire, when it was held, included the threatened evictions of Palestinians in the East Jerusalem. And Israel has seen this ceasefire as a return to the status quo, in which Hamas has a diminished arsenal, but remains capable of keeping more radical groups in check. And a lasting peace would require Hamas to reconcile with its rivals in the West Bank, as this unity precludes the Palestinians from coherently negotiating with Israel. But the expert says that Hamas has few incentives to join the PA, and doing so would likely necessitate unappealing concessions. And for instance, the Middle East Quartet, which comprises the United States and the United Nations, the EU and Russia, asserts that any Palestinian government involving Hamas can only receive international recognition and aid if the group recognizes Israel, renounces violence, and accepts the PLO signs agreements with Israel. Thank you for your attention, and I will now pass the word to my colleague, Ashra.
Okay. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So it's about the uprising and fall of soldiers of Egypt. This is a terror cell that had appeared back in 2014 after the people revolution against the Muslim Brotherhood government, because they divided our society and was uh, taking many actions of violence against the people of Egypt. So there were a huge revolution against them in July 30. It was supported by the Egyptian army, actually. So the people called to remove them. After the remove of the Muslim Brotherhood government, there were a significant terror and violent attacks all through Egypt, because they are a kind of uh, they take a wrong idea of Islam, and they doesn't provide the real face of Islam, because Islam is a religion of peace and mercy and love, and it is not uh, a factor of violence from any way. However, they started their attacks on the eve of revolution, the revolution in 2010. They started in January 23, 2014, with a tweet that they had to fight back all the Egyptian people, the Egyptian army, the security forces, the policemen. They started with several attacks, actually, in Greater Cairo. This was a very significant issue for everybody, because most of the violent here or the activities of terror attacks, it was in Sinai, not in the mainland. So they started with a very criminal attacks, actually, because their terror was very significant to civilians as well as the security forces. They started with a blast, actually, uh, that happened in Cairo University. Their ideology was very different between the terrorist attacks, the terrorist groups that we know, because they combined somehow all the youth that they were frustrated from Muslim Brotherhood to attack the army, to attack the civilians, to attack the security forces in a very random operations, actually. However, they combined actually the Salafi and jihadist ideas with Muslim Brotherhood ideas as well, and the people who was trying to make the revolution back in 2010. So they gathered many followers for them, The most about at least 15 attack was claimed by them in all over Greater Cairo, especially in Giza and Cairo governorates. There were a lot of victims during this attacks. Maybe in this drawings you can see the attacks and the violent groups in Egypt from 2013 to 2016. It was very high at this time. This is the most significant attacks that they have, and many civilians were injured or was considering as a fatalities during this. Actually, Egypt had adopt two sets of policies to fight back for them. The first was aiming to provide a legal framework that legislates their counterterrorism measures. The second, and to drive their finance providers. The second set was aiming to targeting the terrorist cells itself, especially in Sinai and here in the mainland. Of course, moreover, there were helping a policy to help the victims, and another policy, social policy, to tackling the root causes of these terror activities. We had caught the Egyptian security forces caught the founder of this terror cell because he had a later criminal activity. Actually, Egypt had done a great price. We had to carry out a great price. It was extremely high. However, both the people and the government was proud with their victory on terror and how they success to end this bloody era. If you have any questions. Hello.
That it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, but I need to announce something, Todd, if you let me.
Yeah, go ahead.
I believe that this event, or just concentrating on studying all terror organizations from Islamic movement is some kind of Islamophobia, because we have terror groups in Cambodia, in China, in Israel, a Jewish one. We have in Germany, we have in Turkey, we have in all over the places. Even you have the far-right groups in Mexico, in whatever, in United States. This is considering as well as a terror groups.
You're correct.
All your concentration to study is the Islamic movement. I believe this is some kind of Islamophobia, or it should be. You should consider in the future to study the other movements, like in Myanmar, like in other places of the world, because the definition of terrorism may vary between regions of the world, because like Hezbollah or Hamas, like my colleagues says, the people of Lebanon or Iran or Iraq or Lebanon consider them as they are free fighters, not a terror fighter.
Correct.
Okay,
You're correct.
this is some another perspective of the fact that that we live in this world.
You're
So
absolutely correct, Ashraf. And
yeah,
our next cohort will actually be focused on Southeast Asia. We're going to look at a terror group called ARSA
yeah,
that actually sprung up from the genocide that happened in Myanmar to the Rohingya. We're going to look at them, and we're going to look at different active organizations within the Southeast Asia region. So I agree with you, and I appreciate you stating that. We don't want it to appear that it is a form of Islamophobia, especially because our presenters chose the topics that they did. There's just not a lot of information on a lot of the other organizations right now. And so I appreciate what you're stating, and I do agree with that, and try not to justify it in any way. So thank you for your input. You have anything else you want to talk about, Ashraf? Okay.
thank you all, and it was very nice to share my presentation with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashraf. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
Dr. Britton or Dr. Carr, do you have anything to add to the presentations for questions for the panelists?
No, I would just like to follow your sentiments with Ashraf. Totally agree with your sentiments, and I apologize. It is just one area that's been looked at today. We will be looking at other areas in the future.
Correct. Because there's a lot of new information that's coming out from this group and what they've been trying to do to go back into Myanmar. And so that's one group. And I know there's a lot more out there, so we'll definitely look at them. So I think at this time that wraps up our interns. So I want to thank Angela, Sammy, Rafi, Iona. Did I say that right? Probably not.
Joanna.
Joanna, yeah, there you go. And Ludovica, Angela, thank you. You guys did a fantastic job.